100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. Now, have you ever wondered what that passage meant from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech? I did, and what I found was one of the biggest secrets that's not really a secret at all, except to many African Americans, is they are not descended from Africans. I know, I was shocked too, so much so that I asked Africans, and they agreed African Americans weren't Africans. If you don't believe me, Google Arnaldus Montanus America and see the people he saw in 1671. Read books like The Black American Handbook for Survival through the 21st Century by Radine Amin-Ra, What Every African American Should Know by Carrie Davis, and Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes. I just can't believe schools aren't teaching this stuff. What a travesty.
So, from my experience, it seems like there's tension between African Americans and America as a whole.
Some
Right.
No.
As a whole, the history of African Americans in America,
Right.
does not really work in the favor of African Americans.
Can I ask you a quick question in the midst of that?
Okay.
What do when it's not all when you tell an African American, now times have changed, now we're now getting 2015 now, but as African American, are you African? Oh hell no, I ain't African.
They're not wrong though. They're not wrong though. They're not wrong though.
They're not wrong. They're not wrong.
They're not wrong. No, are they right?
But it's just the reaction.
Okay. Sure.
Now, and I could be a little sensitive because of how I grew up.
Okay, hold up though. Here's
okay.
This is going to answer that question. So, the history of African Americans in America does not necessarily work in their favor based on everything that was logged. As you see all the movies, 12 Years a Slave, it's a constant reminder that, hey, African Americans, this is your story in America. When I was in Nigeria, I did not know of the African American story until I got to America. And found out.
That's true.
Right? I did not know anything about slavery. All I knew was we were all given kings' names. Right? I did not know anything about slavery.
Always vague with us. I asked this African dude one time. I was like, why don't y'all? Because Africans don't like African Americans. I don't know if you know this. Yeah, they don't. You know you don't. They'll be looking at me like, no, you're okay. They don't like us, yo. They don't like us. They be judging us. They be looking at us like, look at you, motherfucker. African American. My ass. You are not African.
You're black American. Come from
We got the same phone. What are you
You have
talking
you from
about?
any Kenya. You have not the trust in my.
You're in America now. What are you talking about? Why you not in Africa? Why you not in
I have to
Africa?
look down on you because you're angry.
You're not making no sense. You're crazy.
You're black American. You're trash.
I should do this.
You don't know.
This is why when African people go African. Still African.
Kenya told me on the phone. Kenya told me on the phone. Don't even associate the black American. Don't even associate the black American.
This is why when African people go African. Still African.
Kenya told me on the phone. Don't even associate the black American. They have no
You understand?
No self-esteem.
And Agonglo was said to be one of the kings who tried to stop slave trade.
Ah.
But of course, he did not succeed.
But he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't trade their own people. They would trade people from the wars and battles they did all around the country.
Okay, it's a hot day today, and we're about to go over this road, and what they're saying, this is the road of where the slaves went, the road of no return. So, Nini, just tell us some things about where we're about to go.
Okay, we go to the ocean where they put the slaves in the ships, but the slaves came from the interior. They were bought from the chiefs, from the kings in the interior, and the king got in return cannons and weapons.
Wow. And so literally they were walking this way to get on a ship. And can you imagine the things in which they were thinking, going through their head, going to the ship, and this is a place of no return?
Pour toute l'Afrique,
For all the Africa,
il y a 4 ports.
for all the in all Africa, they have 4 gates. The population of the slave that went out here through this gate was the most slaves.
When they did not have enough chains, they cut a tree, they made a log out of it, and they cut 3 holes in it.
Came from.
And they put 3 holes, and they put the log on top of their head, so that the 3 stay together, walk together behind each other. How many people were
side by side?
600 walked side by side.
You know, it's like an arrow. It means that this road that you come through, it have only one entry. That is no returning back, is the unknown destination. During that road here, all sorts of things happen with the slaves. They can sleep with them, they can beat them, they can do so many things there. Violence.
On peut dire l'abolition en 1848. Et en 1846, c'est le dernier bateau.
The last ship went on 1846, and it was then they don't got any other ship came in for slavery.
Ici, sur les 4 poteaux, il y a hommes et femmes qui sont à genoux.
In all this, you see men and women, men and women, you know, in the forts.
They put a tattooage, they burn it in the back here. The name of the master.
When they do that, they cry, so they go now and buy some iron to close their mouth.
Close their mouth.
Yeah, that's why their mouth is.
The success of Mohammedan Islam in deceiving, misinforming, deforming, and contorting both history and reality over a period of almost 1400 years has been astounding. That is, until now. The greatest tragedy about this particular subject is that most of the descendants of African slavery, the black people in the Americas, around the world, as well as among the African blacks, are totally ignorant of the actual facts. Before we lose the concentration of our listeners, I would like to make the following statement and then prove it. That the worst, most inhumane and most diabolical institution of the black African slave trade was initiated, refined, perpetrated and implemented by the Mohammedan Arabs and later aided and abetted by the black converts to Mohammedan Islam. In fact, The very word slavery has its root in the name Slav, based upon the Slavic peoples of Europe who were subjugated by other Europeans. It is not common knowledge that the Arabic word abd is synonymous with the meaning of slave. For example, Abdullah means literally the slave of Allah, and that in the language of the Arabs, all black peoples are called abid, plural, for slaves. While much has been written concerning the transatlantic slave trade, surprisingly little attention has been paid to the Islamic slave trade across the Sahara, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. While the European involvement in the African transatlantic slave trade to the Americas lasted for just over 3 centuries, the Arab involvement in the African slave trade has lasted 14 centuries. The birth of Mohammedan Islam and its conquests brought about the birth of institutionalized, systematized, and religiously sanctioned slave trade on a massive and global scale. In fact, the Quran allows the taking of slaves as booty or reward for wars of aggression against any and all unbelievers. Incredible and heinous abuses have occurred throughout the history of Mohammedan Islam. By the Middle Ages, the Arabic word abd was in general used to denote a black slave. Ibn Khaldun, 1332 to 1406, the preeminent Islamic medieval historian and social thinker, wrote, "The Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery, because they have attributes that are quite similar to dumb animals." It should also be noted that black slaves were castrated based on the assumption that the blacks had an ungovernable sexual appetite. When the Fatimid Caliphate came to power in Egypt, they slaughtered all the tens of thousands of black military slaves and raised an entirely new slave army. Some of these slaves were conscripted into the army at age 10. From Persia to Egypt to Morocco, slave armies from 30,000 to up to 250,000 became commonplace. The Islamic slave trade took place across the Sahara Desert, from the coast of the Red Sea, and from East Africa across the Indian Ocean. The Trans-Sahara trade was conducted along 6 major slave routes. A comparison of the Islamic slave trade to the American slave trade reveals some extremely interesting contrasts. While 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped across the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade. 2 women for every man were enslaved by the Muslims. While the mortality rate of slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, the percentage of slaves dying in transit in the Trans-Sahara and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90%. While almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines, in harems, and for military service. While many children were born to the slaves in the Americas, the millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the United States today. Very few descendants of the slaves that ended up in the Middle East survive. While most slaves who went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. It is estimated that possibly as many as 11 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, 95% of which went to South and Central America, mainly to Portuguese, Spanish, and French possessions. Only 5% of the slaves ended up in what we call the United States today. However, a minimum of 28 million Africans were enslaved in the Muslim Middle East.